Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast, where we counter the mainstream's right cross with a solid left hook.
Solid left hook.
And always, I am joined by my co-host, James. How you going?
Good, mate. How are you today? Jordie,
Yeah,
my
well,
friend?
not too bad.
Not too bad. Cool.
As always, we've got an interesting show.
Yep.
Covering some hot topics of analysis. So, on today's episode, we'll be looking at we'll be going over what happened in the Northern Territory election.
Yep.
James has got a nice little snippet of information to discuss.
Yep.
And then I've been doing some research on energy production distribution in Australia.
Really?
And why it costs so much.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
It's definitely not.
It's definitely not cheap at all, yeah.
And then after that, we will be looking at the coalition, the Liberal Party's policies going into the election next year.
Yeah.
Because Peter Dutton's just dropped a hot little bomb of information.
That
to
sounds fantastic.
The Australian Financial Review.
That's not the only bomb that Peter Dutton endorses dropping. We're going to be looking as well at his all-expenses-paid trip to Israel and coming back to the Middle East, having a general analysis on what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, how things are going over there. And then we're ending with a nice little segment that we have at the end that Jordie's cooked up for us, which even I don't know what it's going to be.
So this is a new segment, and we're open to ideas on what we should call it.
Yep.
So
If you have any ideas,
stick around for it.
Stick around
Please do.
to find out. All right. Well, without further ado, mate.
What's happening? What's happened in the Northern Territory since the state election?
Well, I think about a day or two after the Territory election, which we covered the CLP's landslide victory against Territory Labor. Essentially, they were running on the existing Labor government had pretty much disenfranchised both sides of the political spectrum. They tried to appeal to the right and then therefore didn't appeal to the right, but also didn't appeal to the left either due to their said capitulation, which is going to be an ongoing theme in today's episode, I find. So the new NT minister, Leah Finocchiaro, I believe her name is, essentially within the first 2 days of them getting into power, she has announced that they will be giving police more power to to enforce tougher laws against crime, because crime is a big problem in the Northern Territory, especially in Alice Springs. However, they have done this by dropping the age of criminal liability from 12 years old to 10 years old. So if you're an 11-year-old child and you commit a crime, you are criminally liable. Now, I'm not sure what you were doing when you were 10. I still can't count properly to this day, but I definitely couldn't count when I was 10. So how that works out, it seems a little bit rough. Obviously, there are other factors at play, because when you have a high crime rate, you do need to have, effective law enforcement. Yep. Obviously, you need to have security in the community, which is understandable. Funnily enough, though, there are other ways to go about reducing youth crime, especially in impoverished areas. For example, according to the Royal Detention, the Royal Commission that was carried out into youth detention in the Northern Territory, they found that a large percentage of the young people suffered from trauma and also developmental and mental health disorders, which seriously impact the way they essentially fit into society.
Yep.
And obviously, without proper support, that is just going to essentially perpetuate crime.
Of course.
So there is a group in the NT called the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress, and they're just essentially calling for further funding to treat repeat youth offenders with actual secure care and rehabilitation instead of just throwing them into a cell.
Yeah.
Which to me sounds like a pretty good idea, again, for children now as young as 10 years old. Another interesting little anecdote as well to note is that there was a particular shopping centre in Alice Springs in which obviously there's been a massive explosion of crime, violence, theft, vandalism, damage to the property.
Yep.
And the shopping centre owner decided that, well, look, instead of employing security guards, which wasn't really getting anyone anywhere, they've decided they've replaced these security guards with I believe they were called Indigenous Public Relations Officers. So these were local guys from the community that could speak the language, and also, probably had a bit more of a cultural understanding with lots of the younger fellas over there as well. So instead of essentially just trying to chase the kids out and call the cops on them, they'd, as they were known in the community, they'd say, kind of stop, what are you doing? Be able to engage with them on a bit more of a human level. And since that has been implemented at this one shopping centre, there's been a massive drop of crime. This is just one particular example, but I think that's actually pretty interesting because it shows how there is more than one way to skin a proverbial cat, Jordie.
There is, that's right.
And my personal opinion is that I think obviously you need to be firm, but obviously there's always room for compassion.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's what people recognise the most.
Not just creating a kind of internal system of policing oppression.
Yes, of course. And that, again, as we know, that will just essentially perpetuate the cycle.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those problems. I don't blame the government, the new NT government, for taking that route. I do disagree with that particular lowering of the age of criminal liability, but it's an interesting problem, and we're going to have to see how it plays out, unfortunately. And all we can hope for is, the best for those communities up north.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah. Now, Jordie, mate, we've got some lights on here.
We do.
So we're using electricity.
We are using electricity.
Yeah. So when you go in your house, you turn the TV on, you use electricity.
That's right.
You boil a kettle using electricity.
Yep.
Where does it come from, mate?
Well,
what have you found?
I've been doing a little bit of a deep dive into the cost of electricity, especially in South Australia here, because I thought I'd maybe just look at our state to begin with, and then maybe later we can look at it nationally.
Yeah, definitely.
But what I found, the model in South Australia obviously has been replicated across Australia, and obviously each state is a little bit different. But what I found was that in the 1990s, our energy distribution and infrastructure was all privatised and basically cut up into a small little pizza.
Yeah, right.
So that each part of our energy infrastructure, from production to distribution, also from transmission to distribution, was all cut up into a nice little pie. Yeah. And then each piece was then privatised.
Oh, lovely. So a proper balkanisation of public infrastructure.
Balkanisation, that's it. Cut it up and privatise it. And financialise it as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Jordie.
Yes.
Some of the detractors of policies like that might say, hey, mate, this improves competition and increases efficiency. How would you respond?
I would say that we do not have an energy market here in South Australia or Australia. We have an energy monopoly.
We do.
There is no market because if there was a proper market, you would be able to choose what power point you plug your appliances into, and you'll be able to choose from a variety of them with different prices all competing with each other, which you don't actually have in your house.
No, definitely not. We're essentially at the whims.
Correct. Of a couple retail providers. Yeah. But where the costs are generated is in the production, the transmission, and the distribution.
Yes.
So, give me 1 second.
That's all right. So I think, again, instead of having just one single entity that has a top-down approach to controlling all aspects of, like you said, generation, distribution, etc., you have at every single layer an interest. Like an entity whose interest it is to profit and make as much money as possible. That. So again, that sounds super efficient.
Why this is also so important to the economy and not just individual consumers like ourselves is that businesses in South Australia are screaming about this.
Yeah.
So I quite often skim the advertiser here in South Australia and the media. And
you're a braver man than I am.
It's I call it my daily dose of brain damage. Yep. However. Yep. You do find some interesting things out about what's going out and what's going on in South Australia. So, at the moment, Nippies, our beloved orange juice,
I love a good glass of Nippies.
Has experienced a doubling in their cost of electricity.
Wow!
In the past year, and it's not just Nippies. So, the Dairy Farmers Association has said that the cost of electricity has went up 38% on average, and that the bill had increased from $70,000 last year to $100,000 this year.
Wow.
And he had also, because of the cost of electricity, get this, he had been forced to hire a consultant to help deal with the cost of electricity. These prices are so out of control and so complex that you need an external consultant to organise the power.
Of course, at a small fee.
At a small fee.
Yes.
So not only is electricity going up, you have to then hire a consultant to just manage the cost of electricity.
That is outrageous.
It's absolutely crazy. It just gets better though. And on top of that, so that was the Dairy Farmers Association. The Century Orchards chief also said that the electricity had went up 60% on average for businesses in the orchard industry. And Nippies itself has said that last year, it's the monthly invoice was $109,000.
Oh.
Which went up from last year's bill, which was 50,000 Australian dollars.
And then obviously these costs get passed on to the consumer.
Correct. This gets better though. So not only had it went up by
more expensive for a bottle of orange juice.
$50,000, that included almost $34,000 of market or network charges, despite using almost 6,200 fewer hours.
Wow. So they're getting way more efficient. They're using a lot less power, yet they're paying exponentially more.
Yeah, and just
far out.
What's important there is $34,500 of market or network charges.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Wow, so it's just, we're going to charge you to use our power just as a blanket on top of your kilowatt hour charge, depending on how much you use.
Correct. And even though in South Australia we're using heaps of renewables.
We are.
In our energy grid, it doesn't matter because it's not just the actual production of the electricity. As I said, it's the actual transmission and the distribution is all owned by these private companies, which we'll get into in a minute. And because they've sliced it up into all these different segments, you have all these monopolistic entities that are just gouging these fees.
Yeah.
So opposed to having obviously your your production. And your distribution, your transmission, say by one or two companies or even one. It's all these little individual companies that are all subsidiaries of other holdings and other investment firms.
Oh, goodness.
So these prices just keep doubling and tripling as the electricity goes through the infrastructure to your power outlet.
Oh, my goodness. But Jordie, I mean, playing the devil's advocate here, my friend, but surely all these companies are South Australian companies and therefore injecting money back into the local economy.
To put it bluntly, no, they are not, and no, they don't. I will get there in a moment.
Right.
So, as I mentioned, South Australia does use a lot of renewable energy.
Yes.
I didn't do a great dive into the renewables.
No.
It's a pretty murky area because there are a variety of renewables, and it wasn't finding the information wasn't as easy to begin with as looking at where we get our gas, which is about 40% of our supply comes from gas. I think when it comes
to renewables, there is a lot of statistical, murky waters, essentially,
of course.
that kind of obfuscate actual real numbers and stuff like that.
As people may be aware of the great Australian company Santos, which is one of Australia's largest gas exploration companies. So, Santos recorded $1.423 billion in profits last year.
Woo!
Not in revenue, but in profits.
In profits, yeah. So that's how much they took home at the end of the day.
That's how much they took home.
After they covered all their expenses, that's how much they took home.
And our friends at the Australian Institute,
the boys,
which do some really good research on this kind of stuff, said that 5 of Australian petroleum production and exploration companies paid no income tax for at least the past 7 years, despite combined income of $138 billion. Wow. And of those companies, Santos paid just $6 million on $28.9 billion of income and paid no income tax from 2015 to 2018 and in 2020.
Far out. That is staggering. That is a disgustingly small amount of tax on a percentage. That's a fraction of a % of tax.
Yeah.
Wow. And obviously that is $138 billion worth of money that is essentially getting gouged out of the pockets of the everyday consumer to have to cope with these extra prices. Yeah. And these guys are just raking it in.
Yeah. And these profits are going offshore to shareholders in other countries.
No.
Yeah,
it's not going back into the local economy.
None of it's staying in Australia.
Jordie, are you telling me that privatisation isn't good?
So, hang on a sec. So that's just that's Santos extracting the gas.
Yeah.
What about the pipelines?
Oh.
That actually distribute the gas in South Australia.
Big shot. Yeah.
State owned?
Yeah. Obviously, of course.
No.
Our representative government is looking out for their constituents.
No, definitely not. So the Australian Gas Networks recorded a profit of $328 million in 2022.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from 2014 to 2022, So over 8 years, they recorded $1.8 billion in supernormal profits on top of their $2 billion profit. So that's $3.8 billion of profit in 8 years. And that's just for the distribution of the gas. That's just for owning, operating and servicing
maintaining the pipelines,
and maintaining the pipelines.
Yeah.
Obviously, we
need that.
We need that.
Yeah.
But $3.8 billion over 8 years, it's a lot of money.
That's quite a bit of money, man. And that's, like you said, that's another layer of the cake. That's another cost layer to the proverbial energy cake that us consumers have to eat.
And the company that owns the Australian gas networks is a infrastructure business company called APA Group.
Lovely.
Which is a company in Australia which operates natural gas and electricity assets.
Beautiful.
And its revenue last year was $1.725 billion.
Far out. They make it sound so benign, don't they?
They do.
We're just operating the gas infrastructure.
We're just operating
it. We're not raking in billions. We're just operating it so you guys can have reliable access to gas.
Yeah. And when you actually try and... Look, this stuff is relatively easy to find. They try and bury it in jargon by saying the allowed annual profits. And it's like as if there's like a certain amount that's allowed. And she's like, look, we're going to allow only $500 million worth of profits.
But then after that, we're still going to keep making money.
Yeah. So that was looking at gas specifically.
Mate, so how expensive is it going to be for a bottle of orange juice? A nice cold bottle of Nippy's OJ. Am I going to be paying $30 for a bottle?
You could, potentially.
Bastards.
And that's just for OJ.
Mate, this is going to cause a bloody revolution.
It is.
In the streets.
Definitely, for sure. You want to go to your smoko truck and get a nice little bottle of Nippy's orange juice. It's going to cost you about, I don't know,
$15.
half an hour of your wages. Okay, so... that was a bit about generation, specifically gas by Santos, absolute criminals, the pipelines that the gas goes through, and then looking at the energy infrastructure as a whole, looking at transmission, because you have generation, transmission, distribution, and then your retail, so you have all these little segments of just profiteering. So the company that owns the transmission, where are we? Sorry, give me 1 second. Recorded profits of $340 million last year. And that company is called Electronet. This is where it gets really interesting.
Really saucy.
Because you're just like, there's this benign little company called Electronet. Sort of cute little name.
It does, Nice little logo I can see there, obviously.
$340 million.
Not bad.
Electronet is owned by Australian Utilities Pty Ltd. So 50% of the company is owned by this Australian Utilities. And it's owned by State Grid Corporation of China.
So that profit is going back to a Chinese consortium.
Not only is it going back to a Chinese consortium, but the State Grid Corporation of China, commonly known as the State Grid, is a Chinese state-owned, I'm going to repeat that, Chinese state-owned electricity utility corporation. It is the largest utility company in the world.
Wow.
This gets more interesting. Hang on. Haven't got to the bottom yet.
Yep.
State Grid is the world's fourth largest company overall by revenue behind Walmart, Saudi Aramco and Amazon.
Ooze. That is a right cross, my friend.
It is.
That is a right cross. My goodness.
And so what I found interesting about this is that you have a state-owned company in China which obviously oversees a lot of electricicity, like state-owned electricity infrastructure in China, owns half the company that owns some of the transmission networks here in South Australia. And where are those profits going back? Into the Chinese state, which then uses those profits to invest back into the Chinese economy.
So, hang on a sec. So, part of our electricity distribution network is state-owned.
Is state-owned.
It is technically state-owned.
Not by the Australian federal government or state government.
Dude, who thought this was a good idea?
Yeah.
That is absolutely outrageous.
It's outrageous.
That is ridiculous. And then obviously they're using our profits to invest in their own country.
Yeah, and build high-speed rail.
Yeah.
Cheaper, more efficient energy infrastructure.
Bring people out of poverty.
Yeah, all those kinds of things that government's meant to do.
I bet you they have cheap-as orange juice over
They
there.
probably have very cheap orange juice. That's right.
Far out. What a bloody rabbit hole.
Absolutely crazy. And
But obviously that much profits
Yeah.
from these mineral and energy companies,
Yeah.
I guess that would buy, if you had that much money and you wanted to keep making that much money, just a little thought exercise for the audience, then you would be able to fund all sorts of lobbying groups, research groups, and organisations that would then be able to, feed information to the media and also influence political policy.
that's right.
Of course, but that would not happen in Australia because we're a representative democracy.
Yeah.
But it does happen.
It does happen.
Damn it.
I'd also just add a interesting little piece of information that Santos does give a lot of money to both the major parties here in Australia at a federal and state level.
That doesn't surprise
So it's
me.
no surprise that they're able to make super profits.
Do we know how
and
much
pay
it is?
no tax. What's that?
Do we know how much money they like? If it's a couple hundred, say if you're donating to each party, say if you're donating $500,000 to each party in an election camp, that's just a random number off the top of my head. I'm not sure what it is, but if you're donating $500,000 and then you're reaping in like billions in profit because of the concessions allowed by said party when they get into government, seems like a pretty bloody good deal for the
Do you want
gas
to know
companies.
the worst part?
Yeah.
Is that it's not $500,000, and this is a number off the top of my head.
Yeah.
It's pretty close on it because I've heard this elsewhere. Santos donated 50,000 Australian dollars to the Labor Party.
What?
Costs $50,000 to influence Australian politics.
No way.
50 grand.
50 grand. That's like a RAV4.
That's a RAV4.
You want to bought out
I don't even. I think a RAV4 throw a bit more than that.
Why are we such cheap bastards?
We're the cheapest political class to buy off
That is outrageous.
in the West.
That is like post-Soviet dictatorship levels.
Yeah.
They probably charge more.
Yeah, probably.
They probably charge more for political influence.
Yeah, that's
What?
right. And what I'll just I'm almost finished. There's
ravage me harder.
There's
Come on.
so many layers
Go
to
on.
this.
Yeah.
It can get a bit much. So, SAPN, which is the South Australian Power Networks, was privatised in the 1990s.
Yep.
It was run by the state government.
It was originally ETSA, Electricity Trust of South
Correct,
Australia.
that's
I
right.
believe.
Yeah. Yes, which was created under the Playford government post World War II, I believe. So, the SA Power Networks arose from the split of generation, transmission, distribution and retail responsibilities. So, the privatisation, the financialisation and the division of our energy infrastructure.
And again, this is just in SA. This is just
That's
in South
just in
Australia.
South Australia.
Obviously, I'm assuming this is pretty much the same
Correct.
in every other
So,
state.
this is interesting. Who do you think owns SAPN?
Well, obviously, Jordie, it's going to be a local South Australian company that injects their profits back into the local
Or
economy.
an Australian corporation that pays tax?
I'd hope so.
No, so the distribution business is owned by the Hong Kong-based Cheng Kong Infrastructure Holdings, which is 51%. And the other 49% is owned by Spark Infrastructures, which is an Australian subsidiary.
Yeah, but they own the lesser half. They own 49%.
Correct.
Yeah.
This gets better. Cheng Kong Limited is a multinational conglomerate based in Hong Kong. It was one of Hong Kong's leading multinational conglomerates. And it is a developer of residential, office, retail, industrial and hotel properties in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're building hotels with that money.
Correct.
Far out.
How the profits are...
I swear if you had to design a system to get... Just from what you're telling me, obviously, and I'm admittedly not a smart man, but just from what you're telling me, from the generation, I guess from the ownership of the actual resources themselves, the generation, the the transmission, the distribution,
and the retail,
all the way.
And we haven't got up. I didn't even look into the retail today.
But this just seems like the most inefficient way to be able to get power from the ground or from the sun or from the wind. From whatever, whatever medium to the PowerPoint that I'm plugging my computer into.
That's right. Well, it might be inefficient for you, but it's very efficient for the profits of these investors and corporations.
You know what, maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I'm just thinking about myself too
about
much
yourself.
and how it impacts my own life. I think, I'm going to start getting on these guys' aside because they're obviously good people.
What I thought was really alarming, and we did talk about this the other week, is this is the overhead and costs for businesses in South Australia and in Australia as a whole.
Yeah.
And for example, companies like Nippies, which is a South Australian company that's over 100 years old, they are astronomical increases of electricity prices.
Yeah. And I guess most energy consumption kind of goes towards manufacturing and industry as well.
Yes, that's right.
How does this bode not just for Nippies but for the rest of our meager manufacturing centre that we have left
and our agricultural sector here in South Australia?
How does that bode well for us? Are we going to be just producing nothing because it's too expensive?
Yeah.
I guess Cheng Kong would probably want it that way, wouldn't they? Far out.
And it really is a rabbit hole. Also, all this information is pretty readily available to find on the internet. It's not heaps hard to find, except what is difficult is when you want to kind of really figure out their profits, because you actually got to go into their account statements. Michael West does a really good job of digging in and finding those numbers. It's not easy to do.
So as I recover from that wounding right cross that Jordie has just delivered to me, we need to talk about the upcoming federal election, which hasn't been announced yet officially. And essentially the new coalition led by the ineffable Peter Dutton.
Potato Head,
the hammer of the working class,
that's
as we like to call him.
Because he crushes them.
He doesn't defend them, he crushes them. But some of his kind of policies that they're working on and how they're kind of trying to skewer the existing Labor government that we have in power now, mate. So what are they talking about? What harebrained schemes have they cooked up?
Here at Left Hook Media, we're going to try and cover the upcoming federal election pretty closely.
Absolutely.
We're going to, in a non-partisan way, try and look at both parties, the kind of policies that they want to deliver, because that's what matters. It's not about rhetoric or leaders. It's about what kind of policies are they proposing and how is that going to make Australia a better country.
Of course.
So we've mentioned previously on the podcast, I had a little brief look into the nuclear energy policy.
Yes.
The Dutton, it's not a policy. There's no substance.
It's kind of like a pipe dream.
It is a pipe dream.
Maybe a fever dream, we could call it.
So we're still waiting on kind of more information about that. Anyway, that'll be one of the major policies that he'll take to the election.
Yep.
And the other policy is going to be a tax cut. Woo! Everyone loves a tax cut.
I love a good tax cut, man. I'm going to get some money back.
So first of all, where is this tax cut going to come from? And this tax cut is aimed at the quiet Australians, the battlers of Middle Australia.
Yeah, the suburban battlers of Australia. Maybe own a Hilux or a Ranger. They've got one house in the suburbs, but due to escalating property prices, that's now worth $2 million. And they're obviously trying to appeal to this segment of society and protect their interests. Is that about right?
Yeah, pretty much. So where is this tax cut going to come from? Well, Peter Dutton was interviewed by the Australian Financial Review, and he has said that it's going to come from first part is going to come from scrapping the HAF, which is the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Of course.
Which is a Labor Party policy to build 30,000 houses, social housing for people in need, like single women with children,
escaping domestic violence,
domestic violence, all the other people that are in need of social housing, because our stocks of social housing and public housing have been decimated over the past few decades. So this is housing for people in need. Like the most desperate Australians that urgently need affordable housing.
Yes, of course. Like we're not getting we're not getting social housing.
No. So this is people that really need it. These 30,000 houses is not enough in the big picture, but it's a starting point.
It's a starting point. Yeah,
correct.
It's better than nothing.
So Dutton has said he's going to scrap this. Has not announced any other projects for social housing, for public housing, or any sort of supply for housing in general. What is that probably going to do? Just jack up pricing of houses.
Yeah. And also put, obviously, the most vulnerable Australians out onto the street, essentially. Where are they going to go? Yeah.
So this information I got from the journalist Michael Pascoe from Michael West Media. So I just thought I should disclose that.
Yeah, good man.
So not only is the HAF going to be scrapped, he also wants to scrap the other policies that the Labor Party has put forward. And those policies are the $10 billion program tasked with building... sorry, I mentioned that. It is with the... sorry, give me 1 second. So it's scrapping the HAF, which is the $10 billion program tasked with building 30,000 new houses. The $20 billion Rewiring the Nation Fund, which is meant to be an investment into upgrading our electricity infrastructure, which we were just discussing about before. To make renewables more accessible, cheaper, and easier to produce and distribute across the country. I think that's pretty reasonable, pretty good. Yep. And the other policy that they're going to scrap is the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund into investing into Australian infrastructure, which is much needed. So those policies that Labor proposed and has going to borrow the money to invest in are just going to be completely wiped out and scrapped. With no other policies proposed or suggested. Just let's scrap all this, and then that money can just go into further tax cuts.
So that's so all these policies they're planning on scrapping, these are all quite long-term policies. So obviously they it's a bit like putting a Band-Aid on a stab wound.
Yes,
but it's better than having the Band-Aid than not having
having the Band-Aid.
So
what the Liberals are going to do is rip the Band-Aid off. Like, let it rip. Let it bleed. And let the market go.
Wow, let her rip. And then they can give you like $200 once.
Yeah, once.
To do that. So that's...
and the tax cut.
No, but that is the tax cut.
That is the tax cut. Yeah, that's right.
So they're saying, hey, look, you're going to get X amount of money back one time, and then that's all that's happening. And then, hey, don't complain about housing prices ever again, or your electricity infrastructure ever again.
There is a policy which is going to address... that's aimed towards young people wanting to buy a home, and that is you're going to be able to access up to $50,000 of your superannuation funds for a housing deposit.
Your retirement
fund. That's right. And as we all know, if you increase demand, what's going to happen to the price of housing?
It's going to skyrocket, mate. It's going to keep going up. So there's no concrete plans in the coalition's policies to actually address any of the systematic things.
Don't increase the housing stock. Don't provide more social housing to people that are in need. Instead, increase people's purchasing power for houses and jack up the price of housing. And also dip into your super.
Of course,
So that when you actually need to retire, and instead of having a modest super fund, they can get you into retirement so you can live comfortably. You're like,
wow. And I guess that will then, in turn, further on, that'll decrease essentially the financial security of lots of older people. Therefore, we'll kind of look at driving wages down as more people are going to be willing to work crappier jobs for longer, for lesser pay, just to get by. And then we're just not going to have, again, the secure housing, reliable energy. And, wow, that sounds horrible. The more I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. That's pretty horrific. But how do they get away with this? How do you think they get away with it?
Because they've sold a mantra of small government, no tax for the past 20 to 30 years. Well, it goes back further than that.
All the big boys already aren't paying tax.
Yeah, no, they're not paying tax anyway. That's the whole point. But
I'm sure my tax isn't going to go down after my one-time tax. Tax cut, I'm sure, which will happen one time. I'm sure after that, I'm just going to keep getting taxed harder.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we need to make up for these, these shortages in the budget.
Yeah, but their idea is we'll get government out of your life and we'll decrease taxes.
Even though I'm the head of the government, we don't want a strong government. It begs the question, what on earth are you doing? What's your job? But how does... And I guess for our audience that doesn't know, I mean, we've got, in Australia, our media monopoly is pretty much like 3 companies that own 90+% of all the media, radio, TV, and print media in Australia. So we're
highly concentrated media ownership in the of all Western liberal democracies.
I'd imagine, which, again, how can you be a liberal democracy with that high concentration of media ownership? But I guess they're all on this, they seem to have universally... I mean, I guess they support the Labor Party when they have to, but they seem to be pretty universally supporting the coalition. And they always seem to have done that.
These policies that the Liberal Party are going to scrap are very moderate. They're very moderate to begin with, and they're purely driven off market forces as well, and off borrowing money.
So they would just increase the financialisation.
Correct, but their policies nonetheless.
Yeah.
And what are the Liberal Party proposing? No policies.
Yeah.
Let's just destroy any of the policies the Labor Party's put forward.
But when they use the term "let the market rip," like, it's not a chainsaw. I hope it's not a chainsaw.
Yeah, it's not a whippersnipper.
It's not a whippersnipper. Let it rip.
Well, it sort of is. You let it rip, and then you just gut all the social housing.
Yeah, and then you cut me in half with a chainsaw.
Yeah.
That's kind of reminiscent of Argentina, who recently elected Javier Milei.
Yeah.
And then I believe poverty is now like 70% of their population is below the poverty line. I guess letting the market rip is typically a good idea. But this is back to the point that bothers me, and this is something we've discussed a little bit on the pod, but this is something we talk about frequently, is that it wouldn't be hard because the Labor Party's policies, they have capitulated to the corporate interests to get these small concessions through. So it wouldn't be hard for any responsible government who actually represents their, the voter to, counter with some actual constructive policies.
Yeah.
You could counter with constructive policies like, mild increase on tax, mining royalties to the multinationals, and that would cover all of the tax cuts that you'd want to give. It seems they're incapable of actually providing a decent policy,
it's because as you know, it's the media just assassinates them.
Yeah, so I guess to quote the ineffable Michael Parenti, they invent the reality, they manufacture the consent. Yes, and then that allows essentially the entire political spectrum in the Overton window to be pushed further to the right.
Yes.
And then obviously to not get skewered by the right, I guess this is what's happened. It mirrors what's happened in the Northern Territory, where the Labor Party, I guess they're so scared of getting any criticism that they capitulate, but then they isolate and alienate both sides of the political spectrum because they get used and then they're going to get tossed aside because all the interests are going to support the coalition anyway at the end of the day. So where does that leave? I guess it brings it to a term that we've been discussing, the extreme centre.
That's right.
But that is considered the left wing.
Yeah,
it's centre. Right. And then I guess you get the coalition, which are essentially just an extreme kind of far-right corporate terrorist organisation. And where does that lead the average Aussie?
And just stripping back the kind of political ideology and rhetoric of like left-wing, right-wing, the extreme centre, it's also just arguing upon policy.
Yeah.
Because if you don't really have if you don't really have any kind of strong political beliefs, you don't really know where you sit, you haven't read heaps of political philosophy, I don't blame you if you haven't. It really just comes down to policy. Is that government proposing good policy that's going to help Australia into the future, help the majority of us, or is there no policy, or is it garbage policy?
No, exactly.
And what Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party are going to propose is no policy and strip back any of the policy that the Labor Party has enacted since being in power.
Yeah, I guess Jordie, one area, if we can segue, area where they are in full agreement is support for nuclear submarines. They're both they are both down to clown with the nuclear submarines.
Yep.
And they are both in bipartisan support of a strange little country in the Middle East that has been the centre. It starts with I. It's not I'll give you a hint.
It's not Iraq?
It's not Iraq.
Okay.
It's not Iran.
It's not Iran.
Istanbul is a city.
That is, yeah.
So there's one.
Only there's one left.
There's one more that comes. It's not Iceland. It's not Iceland.
Okay.
Ireland. Yeah.
Let me have a stab at it.
Yes.
Is it Israel?
It is Israel.
Okay.
How'd you guess?
As I said, I had a stab at it.
That was a hard one.
Yep.
You had
Please go on.
Just like Dutton's going to be, his policies are going to be stabbing me in the guts later on.
They are.
Because the man himself, Peter Dutton, has recently taken a trip to Israel. So he's. I wouldn't call it a holiday, I guess. Holidaying to an apartheid state seemed a bit odd, but I'm sure there's some beautiful scenery, beaches, and ancient sites that are all very interesting. But he's essentially last month he's been on a all expenses paid 3-day trip to Israel. This was all paid for by the Australian Israeli Jewish Affairs Committee, AIJAC, which I haven't really done heaps of research into. Seems like the kind of Australian franchise of APAC, which has gained notoriety in the United States.
So a pro-Israeli lobby group paid for his trip?
They paid for his trip.
Yeah.
And this group actually came out very quite publicly and strongly denounced our current Labor government's position. There was a vote earlier in the year at the UN General Assembly about whether we should support Palestine in a bid for full UN membership.
Yeah.
And I guess it doesn't really mean much practically, but our government, that's probably why our government voted in support for it. And they just got absolutely slammed by the AIJAC. So on this trip, Dutto's met with all the boys. So he's met with our favourite sandwich, panini banana Benjamin Netanyahu. He's met with the Zog, President Isaac Herzog, and he's met with the Foreign Minister Israel Katz. So he's essentially gone over, and it seems to me that the point of this trip was to essentially shore up his proposed government's position in support of Israel. So I think, reading between the lines, he's kind of gone over there and he's met with all the kind of relevant dignitaries, and he's saying, look, I'm not in power now, but you have to know if I do get into power, we will provide you with unwavering support. Now, this isn't actually too much different from the unwavering support that has been given by the Labor Party, who's currently in power, but they have at least expressed concerns. So they've kind of done it. We've talked about this before on the pod. They've kind of done some public kind of window dressing. We're like, maybe we're a bit concerned that there's some civilians dying. You're not killing them, but they're dying, and it doesn't look good. Whereas Dutton's gone over there and he's, pretty much, mate, we got you back, do what you want. So he posted a picture on X of himself and the Zog, President Isaac Herzog, which he captioned with, we discussed Australia's and Israel's close relationship and shared trust. We both expressed our desire for this relationship between our two countries to continue to grow by building on our mutual interests and shared values. And that statement on its own, I think, really says a lot, because we do actually have a lot in common with Israel. We're both European settler colonial societies that essentially their state was built on the oppression of the local people and the theft of their land and resources. Both our countries also operate geopolitically, even though we're at other ends of Asia. The purpose of the country in its present state, in its present configuration, is to essentially prevent further regional integration by that region into having kind of a unified power bloc, and also act as Israel has been called, an aircraft carrier in the Middle East that cannot be sunk. Just as Australia is also they want us to be used as an unsinkable submarine carrier from which we can harass China. And that is, and when you look at it from that perspective, Peter Dutton is bang on. That's probably the truest thing he's ever said. And so I guess we do have shared values. We were both based upon kicking the native people off their land. We both essentially work at the whim of the imperialist Anglo-US empire.
And as you said, we're both imperial outposts from two sides of Asia. It's interesting.
And I guess they've been given probably a little bit more free rein just due to the geographic location of where they are, because it's such a sensitive part of the world. I mean, you look at a map and you can essentially stretch from, like Lebanon, Turkey, Syria, all the way across the Suez Canal, Egypt, all of North Africa, which has obviously, Berber culture, Arabic culture, varying different interpretations of Islam. But you think, how dangerous would that be to the hegemonic status quo if all of that was united into a single power block? What can we do to stop that ever getting united, put one little decisive wedge right in the middle and ensure that the existence of that state is paramount? Australia, we're a bit more on the outskirts, but I think it's important to see how our role as a European nation in Asia will, again, prevent the exact same thing from happening. So that, again, if we can look at it from that way, him shoring up support, will that lead to foreign interference and foreign funding towards the coalition from the State of Israel? Possibly. But, however, if they are on one person's side. We know there is a lot of political force exerted behind that to essentially achieve that goal. We have seen that in the United States, we've seen that in lots of Europe, and we've seen that in the United Kingdom as well, which is quite important to mention.
And I was just going to add, I imagine that the coalition will suppress dissident and pro-Palestinian voices here at home in Australia.
Yeah, it's probably going to be illegal to be Palestinian pretty soon in Australia.
Yeah, I just saw in America that some of the universities are changing the definition of Zionism to be equated with anti-Semitism.
Anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
Yeah, sorry, anti-Zionism, and that you can't use the word Zionism because it is going to be equated with the word...
with anti-Semitism.
Yeah, with anti-Semitism, yeah.
The huge irony of that statement is that committing a genocide on a Semitic group of people, i.e. the native Palestinians, seems pretty anti-Semitic to me.
Yes.
But it's funny, again, because coming back to how that shifts the political conversation in Australia, the coalition have just been skewering the Labor government, saying, you don't support, Israel. There's a huge rise in anti-Semitism in Australia. And then obviously in their infinite cuckoldry, the Labor government has responded by appointing essentially an Israel lobbyist as the anti-Semitism envoy, which we covered a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's pretty crazy because there's a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East at the moment, and I think a responsible statecraft revolves around having a responsible position, and not just advocating for for ethnic cleansing. Like again, Dutton seems to be in full support of. He also did an interview with Sky News in which he said, "Look, paraphrasing it again, we're great allies with Israel, and we have a history of sharing intelligence cooperation." And as a result of that intelligence sharing and cooperation in the Middle East particularly, that actually resulted in the lives of some diggers. Digger is the affectionate term for the Australian soldier, some diggers being saved, which actually makes you think, wow, I guess, we can rely on the Israelis. However, there's no actually report. That's a completely unsubstantiated claim. Obviously, I'm not privy to the going-ons in the intelligence community, but there's never been a government report or a released military kind of explanation to say, hey, at this point here, the potential deaths of Australian soldiers was prevented by Israeli intelligence. Funny thing is as well, he doesn't obviously give the context as to why Australian soldiers are in the Middle East. They definitely were not playing a role in being subservient to the global imperial hegemon. At the whims of the Zionist entity. That was definitely not the case. It's always important to remember to all our audience, not necessarily singling out the Zionist state in itself, but if anyone wants to do some research, we can look at the Project for the New American Century and the Clean Break Memorandum, all the absolute ghoulish neocons that existed in the Bush Jr. Administration, and how lots of their... Well, one, we can look at where their loyalties lie, and also we can look at how essentially these policies have since gone on and destroyed the Middle East in the last 24 plus years. So it's quite interesting. Obviously, this is coming at a time when Penny Wong, there's escalating tensions, as we cover pretty regularly on the show, specifically between Hezbollah and the Zionist entity. In which they're starting to trade. There's some serious rocket fire going back and forth. Penny Wong has advised all Australians to leave Lebanon. They're essentially saying, look, there might be a time when you can't get out of Beirut. So if you're an Australian person in Lebanon, we have lots of Lebanese Australians in Australia and family back over there. They're saying, look, it's time to get out. I'm presuming this is so they can avoid some sort of political blowback when Israel starts the mass bombing of Beirut, which I believe they're looking for any excuse to do. Yes.
They have quoted saying that they'll turn it into a car park.
That's fantastic. And it seems that that's all they know how to do is to turn, heavily populated civilian areas into deserted wastelands. Now, as well, again, it's funny, the irony's not lost on me that there hasn't really been too much protest about the Australians that have been killed in Palestine. We've had some Palestinian Australians that have been killed. Or the Australian aid worker that was killed by Israeli forces a couple months ago. Which we also covered. In which case their lips were sealed. Again, the standard rhetoric of, well, we're concerned about the behaviour. however still completely allowing that behaviour. Just before we get off this topic, going back to Israeli intelligence, as Peter Dutton has so eloquently explained to us, the importance of having intelligence ties to Israel, because their intelligence service is so good and always acts in the best interests of Australia. It's important to note that this seems to contradict the fact that Israeli intelligence supposedly did not know the October 7th attacks were going to be undertaken. I'll give you a little hint, though, a little secret. You can't tell anyone. They knew.
They knew?
They knew.
Okay.
Yeah. The Egyptians, supposedly 10 days beforehand, because obviously they have their own intelligence services and they do not like Hamas either.
Yes.
As you can go back in the political history, Hamas was originally an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Egyptian government does not like the Muslim Brotherhood. They've obviously since kind of, diverged from each other a bit more. But the Egyptian intelligence informed Israeli intelligence about 10 days beforehand, hey, look, there's going to be some stuff going down. You might want to prepare. I think as well, though, that this is just my opinion, the real far-right settler, Likudnik, Zionist psychopaths in the current Israeli government saw this as a perfect excuse to undertake the long-awaited ethnic cleansing of all non-Jewish Palestinians.
So basically, they just, if there was going to be an attack, if an attack was going to happen,
well, I'm not saying that. Yeah, just wipe your hands of it, and then you can react
or at least
any given way,
or possibly play ignorant to it, and that's just pure speculation.
Of course, that again. Pure speculation, but just some food for thought there. Yeah. He also didn't mention the time when Israeli Mossad actually stole, I think we've covered this before as well, they stole some passport information off of 4 Australians, and then that information, that fraudulent information was used in a assassination in Dubai by the Mossad. So doesn't seem very friendly to me. Doesn't seem like they have our best interests at heart. But do you know what? We can all rest assured knowing that going into the next election, we will have Israel's best interests at heart.
That's right.
Yeah, man. While we're on the topic of Israel, just quickly as well, before we wrap up this topic, they have, in the last couple of days, they have raided, essentially sent in military forces into the West Bank. So originally it was just focused on Gaza, but now they have kind of, I guess, given up all pretenses of just reacting to Hamas by going to the West Bank. I believe 10 people were killed. There was an airstrike that killed 4 people. A 10-year-old boy was killed. But don't worry, because according to a statement by the Israeli state, they killed a Hamas commander. Now, I think every Palestinian is a Hamas commander, so I'll keep that as food for thought. And then,
or they're sitting on top of the Hamas commanders.
Yeah, they're sitting on top of the Hamas commander. That 7-year-old boy there, he is a Hamas commander. And they have also proceeded to cut off food, water, electricity, and power in the West Bank. So hopefully we will not see another humanitarian disaster like we have seen in Gaza.
So all the kind of standard tools of the apartheid playbook.
Yeah, all the standard tools, all the genocide tools, unfortunately. 600 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October the 7th, most of them by settlers as well, not actually by the Israeli military. So I guess the military needs to exert some dominance and, I guess they want to do their share of slaughter as well. So they're getting underway. And that is just really horrible and really depressing. And again, we should agitate and do all we can to raise awareness about the horrors.
I heard a good quote from Max Blumenthal, who's an American journalist from the Grey Zone.
Grey Zone, shout out.
He said something I thought was quite funny. We'll end on this. As he said that Israel is an army with a state, not a state with an army.
State with an army. So I believe we are seeing that play out.
Keep that in mind.
Yes. Cool. To finish off the show for you this week, we have a fun new little segment that Jordie has cooked up for us. I'm actually going in blind. I've got no idea what this is about or what it's going to entail. Mate, hit me. What's going on? What have you planned?
All right, so we are open to any suggestions.
Yes.
What we should name the segment. As I mentioned earlier, skim the Advertiser, which is the absolute garbage newspaper here in South Australia.
It's the cognitive equivalent to hitting your face against a pole for about half an hour.
That's right.
Yes.
The only problem is if you don't read it, you're sort of uninformed. If you do read it, you're ill-informed. So Anyway, I do try and skim the media quite a bit. Newspapers like this, it gives you an interesting perspective of the different kind of voices and how bad Australian journalists really are.
Correct.
So there's kind of a class of journalists here in Australia that all kind of have cushy jobs at a major newspaper like the Australian or the Advertiser or the Sydney Morning Herald.
You bastard.
And all of them are, they're on pretty good money. They're all on well over 100K a year, and they're able to just get away with writing these articles that are just absolutely atrocious. So we were thinking of maybe naming the segment Australian Journalists Suck, or just so we're open to all ideas. We'll come up with a concrete name later on. So if you could maybe leave some suggestions in the comments, that would be sensational.
But I guess this is something we could do every week.
Or it's not fun. It's pretty easy to find these kinds of articles. It's not, you don't have to look too hard.
There's a lot of them out there.
So the name of this article is Australia's Demoralised Kids Need Some Help. And what's wonderful about this article, the first thing I noticed when I was looking at the Advertiser, was that the photo they've used for the article isn't a photo from a classroom here in South Australia. It's a AI generated photo of a classroom depicting mostly young boys sitting in a very sunny room staring at what I imagine is the teacher or the whiteboard. So they couldn't even get an actual photo. They just had to use...
The kids are too demoralised.
Yeah,
they can't take photos
an AI-generated image, which will be interesting going forwards. I imagine there's going to be a lot more AI-generated images being used in the media. So this article it caught my eye when I was reading it, partly because it's completely psychotic. So... There is a mental health report just published by the journal The Lancet Psychiatric, deserves to be widely read. It presents a deeply concerning global picture of anxiety and depression amongst the young.
That's quite fair enough,
One of Australia's leading psychiatrists, Patrick McGorry, describes the situation as a silent public health crisis. And that 50% increase in mental health conditions since 2007. As to why the situation is so dire, McGorry cites the report's conclusion that the reasons include intergenerational wealth inequality, student debt, insecure work, unaffordable housing and rental costs, as well as climate change and harmful effects of social media.
Absolutely. I agree. That's very reasonable.
Pretty reasonable thing.
Pretty reasonable thing, yeah, definitely.
So that's the report that's cited in this article. And then it goes on to say that young people, the question has to be asked, what are the underlying reasons explaining why recent generations lack the resilience and optimism needed to overcome adversity and hardship? So straight away, the article turns onto the fact that kids just aren't resilient. They need to be more optimistic.
So he's saying at the beginning of the article, he cites the published report. And then just is trying to dispute it.
So he's just...
the report that he didn't write. So the report saying that kids are getting more anxious, younger generations are more depressed. There's a whole lot of reasons as to why that's so. And these are the reasons.
These are said reasons.
But they're not my reasons.
But then he questions, he goes, how are these kids not so resilient? After all, he goes, the older generations experienced the 1919 Spanish flu and the 1930s global economic depression and 2 world wars. Not only did they survive, but went on to prosper and led productive, fulfilling lives. Not mentioning the 1950s and 60s economic boom in Australia after World War II, what is called the golden era, where most of the baby boomer generation acquired their wealth and their housing. Completely just kind of skims over that, doesn't mention it. And then it goes on to say schools once taught courage, resilience and optimism. But over the past 40 years, students have been cocooned in a protective shell.
I can see where this is going. We lack the stability of the British Empire.
And then it goes on, so it says, new age progressive classrooms promote an environment that is comforting, therapeutic, and students never fail, and teachers are non-judgmental. Instead of national pride... So instead of national pride and optimism about the future, the younger generation are being taught Western cultures like Australia are structurally racist, classist, homophobic, and the world is about to end due to impeding climate change catalysm. And then it says, Australia's foundation as a Western liberal democracy has not been taught. Mm-hmm. Students have been taught a black armband view where they and every future generation are responsible for the guilty sins of the past. Literature no longer deals with the best that has been thought and said based on beauty, truth, and a search for meaning. Instead, students are taught to critique and deconstruct texts in terms of power relations and the new trinity of gender, ethnicity, and class. That is the new trinity, the new holy trinity. The new holy trinity, by the way.
Holy trinity of the woke mobs.
Yeah, so they're taught no literature anymore based on beauty and truth. And so he cites author here named Viktor E. Frankl in his account on why some survived the Nazi concentration camps and others didn't. He said because once a person loses faith in what he describes as a moral and spiritual sense of inner meaning, then despondency and despair soon follow. If a person is not morally and spiritually enriched, then there is nothing to draw on in times of adversity, suffering, and pain. While there's no doubt poverty, lacking a home, and insecure work contribute to anxiety, with courage and inner strength, one can overcome adversity.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It is very beautiful.
Yeah.
This is the nail in the coffin, though. While religion, especially Christianity, is often disparaged and criticised as obsolete and irrelevant, there's no doubt believing in something higher, more transcendent and life-affirming offers a sense of optimism and hope. Religious absent in an increasingly materialistic and secular society is not the only reason many young people lack the ability to overcome adversity and find a deeper and more enriching sense of life. Too many have ignored their responsibility to teach children risk-taking, independence, and the fact that life is often harsh and unforgiving. Given parents have allowed their children to become addicted to a soulless virtual world devoid of face-to-face human contact and real-world social interaction. The closing remarks are, instead of screens and mobile phones, far better if parents introduce their children to classic myths, legends and fables, like the Iliad, the Odyssey, Beowulf and Grendel, and the stories of Boudica, where heroes and heroines, though overwhelmed, refuse to succumb to what fate dictates.
Wow. Dude, what
our generation
is dealing with.
And kids younger than us, what they are lacking are hymns and myths and tales and the Odyssey.
No one read
strong Christian values and virtues.
No one read them Beowulf and Grendel when they were young. Sorry, I just
can't afford a house?
Yeah. Read Beowulf.
Are you feeling anxious? Here, read this tale of Beowulf.
Look, Beowulf is a banger.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, but I think he's missing the point. Just quietly, I'm not going to say this man's name, but looking over to his screen, he's written a book. Now, can you go down the bottom? He's written a book called Wake Up to the Woke. It's time, Australia. It's time we wake up to the woke. Oh, my goodness. Wow. Do you think that man has ever worked a day in his life? Do you reckon he's ever picked up a shovel?
No.
I doubt it.
I highly doubt that as well.
He was educated. He was read Beowulf in the Iliad.
He's read Odyssey, the Iliad, yeah. He's read the Old Testament, all the bangers.
Boudica as well.
And that has built a whole lot of resilience so that he can sit down, write these kind of absolute crap articles and read about 120 grand a year, probably.
Good man. Yeah. Again, Jordie, I think this is a point we make every episode. We're in the wrong profession.
We are.
We need to start.
Yeah.
I need to get some brain damage and just start writing deranged articles.
Buy some shares in Santos.
Yes.
Start a lobbying or consulting firm.
Yes.
And start writing articles about the woke mob in Australia and how kids need to read more of the Odyssey and biblical tales.
Far out. You know what, man? With that,
yeah,
I am inspired. I'm going to go home and read the Odyssey.
So will I.
No worries.
All right, guys. We're going to wrap it up.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Let us know if you like that segment because, as Jordie said, there is no shortage of garbage that we can make ourselves dumber by reading for your entertainment. So like and subscribe and have a good one. Thank you.
See you next week. Thanks.